I'm sure that everybody who is here, because of what you said that you're doing, probably have a kind of grasp of practice research as an idea already. But within this project, we're really thinking about that as performative research that is enacted through doing, so that we're participating in the research by our presence and involvement in the workshops that we have. And so I mentioned what we're interested in is identifying the moment of knowledge, so the moment of coming to know, or of perhaps having that kind of research insight through the work that we're doing. And also acknowledging that that moment might be identified in retrospect rather than in the moment of its happening. So not necessarily kind of having multiple breakthroughs in any one of those afternoons. But thinking about how through our embodied engagement with the materials and ideas that we're exploring, that we are creating knowledge, and also that that knowledge will not be experienced or created for everybody in the same way. And so that's also why I think this kind of group approach is really important, because the insights that we might each be contributing together might come to kind of a much more weighty and rounded picture of what's happened. And so this is, I think, really highly linked to contemporary practice in terms of the processes of making that many people are using in their work, and how they're using that work as a way to achieve different ways of doing and thinking and being through their practice. And in particular, building on and transforming our existing tacit knowledge. So there was quite a wide range of practice that was described. There's in the room quite a wide range of different instrumental approaches that people are using. And so I think that's quite interesting as well, the kind of perspectives that we bring from those different backgrounds that we have. And so, of course, that existing knowledge that we have contextualises the way that we experience what we're doing, and I want that to be at the forefront of the way that we discuss things, and really valued, that we all have a different approach to this because of our different backgrounds, and therefore that actually enhances what we're doing. Okay, so these are the kind of questions that come out of that then, in terms of the way that we're approaching this. How can we meaningfully contextualise for others the moment of knowledge in our work? And so within this group, that first of all means how can we talk to each other, and then how can we tell other people what we've told each other. So how can we kind of extend that beyond our embodied experience? How can we use reflection in order to identify that? So I think it's not a given that just by reflecting in any way does it become clear where that experience of knowledge has taken place. So how can we structure that reflection in a meaningful way to help us to structure that? And also, how can we convey that our experiences were different and yet somehow of the same thing and contributing to the same thing? So how can we bring that together? The second part of my sort of three-part methodology is the idea of performance autoethnography. There's a book by Lauren Redhead that outlines how he conceptualises this as different from autoethnography as a method of sort of participating and then storytelling. This is a method where he's thinking about researchers who are performing and then reflecting and then performing as well as writing. So how performance can be an expression of autoethnographic reflection as well as how writing can be. And I put some quotes there. He says it's a discourse that simultaneously writes and criticises performance. So it's basically using performance as its own self-critique. In particular, this bit at the bottom, which hopefully the piano is not too much in the way of, where he says this, it shifts attention away from the narrative eye, so only the kind of storytelling about experience, but the performative eye, so the enactment of that experience, which in his book he talks about how that can prioritise perhaps points of view and expressions of knowledge that are perhaps not prioritised often in academic context or even in performance context. So lots of things that perhaps might seem on the edge of academic practices group using performance as an expression of narrative experience hopefully can come more into the centre of what we're doing. So again, there are three points that came out for me that we would hopefully focus on about how what we have enacted can be sustained beyond the moment in which we enact it. So how, not just about remembering, but about kind of sustaining and then transferring that experience that we've had. Also thinking about when are we performing and not performing. So as I said, this is not like a staged moment of performance, but it's an exploratory performance. Then there is a question about which actions are part of performance and which actions are not part of performance. And obviously there's quite a lot of scholarship which talks about how performance is contextualised in non-staged settings, but also we might want to think about how our experience in the room, how everything that we're doing might also be part of the experience that we're having. And also how can we re-perform or represent the narratives that we create. Okay, and then the final bit of this is really the bit that really relates to having a group do this rather than doing this as an individual, and that's this idea of collaborative event ethnography, which is quite a new methodology, and I was quite excited to learn about this because what I really like about what I have read so far, studies that have been done using this type of ethnography, is that none of the current studies are about performance, but all of them end up talking about performance in some way in the things that they study. So it's a kind of methodology that led the people who've used it so far to think about performance even when they're not performing. So that's what made me excited about it. But basically, collaborative event ethnography was developed as a way for groups of people to make ethnographies of things that were too large for one person to cover them. And a lot of these have been like mega climate conferences and things like that. So in order to do that, the group needs to come up with a series of kind of shared aims and goals that they want to achieve during the time that they're working apart or that they're kind of not observing together. And in particular, they talk about how these large events that they're surveying are themselves kind of fragmentary and have kind of different and kind of independent unitary parts, and how can that be brought together as a whole. So again, that had like a parallel for me with how individuals are having individual experience of performance and how can we bring that together as a whole. And so I said something about performativity already. Gavin Weston, who is our colleague in anthropology, used this methodology to study queuing at the Antiques Roadshow, which actually is quite an interesting paper that they wrote about that, if you're interested in that. And they talked about how people's experiences of queuing were quite embodied, and how there was, what people thought they were doing when they were queuing and how they were experiencing that, and basically how they were enacting things that they thought about queuing. And what they really found was that we all have perhaps some kind of shared internalized views about how queuing should be done and how we think people should do it, and none of us follow those rules, but all of us say that we do. So that's, if you're interested in queuing, that's quite interesting. But what they and then also they cite this paper by Corson, who also looked at a kind of large climate conference. These kind of ethnographically informed results, and ethnographically informed because they are based on observation, participant observation, but also individual participation, revealed that actually the research questions that were being asked in those projects were understood in a number of different ways by the people who were researching them, as well as kind of bringing these different observations together as well. So they basically made the research more rich by having more people kind of present ways of interpreting it. And so they have understood performativity within events through this methodology. And so my kind of sort of take on that, I turned it a little bit on its head in order to understand performance as an event, like not an event like a concert, but as a kind of phenomenological event where we bring our own perspectives to this kind of moment of happening. And so therefore, I think this is a good methodology to work from, where we can kind of bring our own different perspectives in order to have that group picture, but also, as happened in these other studies, to hopefully enrich those research questions as well. So these, again, were the issues that came out of this for me, about how can we combine our observations that might arise from performing and not performing. So that could be that we are observing performance. So some of us might be observing and some of us might be performing, or it might be that there are moments within performance where we feel that we're not performing, and how can we combine those things? How can we represent our work as a group, and also how can we talk about knowledge that we came to as a group? And I think that's something that really interests me. I'm really interested in my own work in collaborative relationships, how I've been influenced by people, not only by what they actually do, but just how that working relationship has changed me as a person. And I think that's more subtle than just saying we've made a decision, but it's kind of a more kind of interpersonal thing. Okay, so that's the kind of theoretical, methodological information. And so I just want that to lead into then now us discussing how we can collaboratively decide some shared aims and goals that will become our research goals for the project. So hopefully it will come from all of us. And so these are the three questions that I had that I thought we could use to inform that, about what you actually want to know, like why did you come here and what do you hope to know, what for you are the goals of performing, and what do you think that we should be attending to in the work that we do.